US Vice President J.D. Vance says Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine will not end anytime soon. His comments come on the heels of the US and Ukraine inking a much-awaited rare earths deal. It's a deal President Trump has heavily promoted over the past 3 months. It gives the US access to Ukrainian minerals while investing in Ukraine's reconstruction. Observers say the final draft of the deal is reportedly less in favor of the US and does not call for repayment of past US aid to Ukraine, and even includes a tougher language towards Russia. Let's take a closer look at this story. For more, we're joined by Ambassador William Taylor. He is the former US envoy to Ukraine, who served under President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Ambassador Taylor, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Taylor, what do we make of what happened this week? Would this deal now solidify U.S. military commitments to Ukraine?
I think this solidifies the U.S. economic interest in and investment in Ukraine for the long term. I mean, the Secretary of Treasury, Mr. Besson, made it very clear in his comments that this is a long-term relationship, and it's a message, he said, to President Putin in Russia that the United States is committed to Ukraine for the long term and wants to see Ukraine succeed in the long term as an independent, sovereign nation. That's a strong message to Mr. Putin. But you asked the right question about military guarantees. That's a separate issue, and it's also necessary. The economic agreement is useful in its sense, but it needs to be supported by, complemented by, completed by a military agreement, probably with the Europeans, to put a real force on the ground in Ukraine.
Ambassador Taylor, the U.S. Treasury Secretary says that no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. He says the U.S. supports a free and sovereign Ukraine. Remind us, what's driving a harsher tone from the Trump administration towards Russia?
I think you're right to identify a shift. And maybe it goes back to the very good conversation that President Trump had with President Zelensky in the Vatican on Saturday. That was the first time that the two men had a direct conversation, person to person, and without vice presidents and special envoys and other aides to filter the discussion. No, this was unfiltered, direct conversation. And you're right. Since then, President Trump sounds like he's begun to realize that President Putin is not part of the solution. President Putin is part of the problem. President Putin is holding up one of maybe President Trump's primary initiatives in the foreign policy field. And President Putin is dragging his feet. And is tapping him along, as President Trump has said. So I think that is a shift that you're right to identify.
All right, now the U.S. has made several concessions, including letting Ukraine have full control over the mining and no conditions of repayment of previous U.S. aid. Why is that so?
I think in order to get the Ukrainians to agree. This is what happens in negotiations. One side puts down a proposal. The other side evaluates the proposal, identifies the good things and the bad things about the initial proposal. And the second side then makes suggestions, makes a counter proposal to rectify, to bring into balance these elements that you described. You're exactly right. Those were out of balance. And now it's back into balance. So this is the way negotiations should take place.
Ambassador Taylor, how much of this deal with Ukraine is about the U.S. diversifying its rare earth needs given the escalating trade war with China?
I do. Although I have to say, that the timeline on developing these Ukrainian deposits is long. This is not going to be immediate. These are not minerals that are in stockpile in Ukraine. These are mines that have to be identified, developed, and it will take time to develop these minerals. So it's important to do what you said, is that is to diversify the sources.